Okay, I'm doing narrative therapy right after solution focused. I'm so long winded. I'm sorry. All right, I'm going to try to keep this one short. Okay, narrative therapy, way of being, the role of the counselor. They're caring, open, empathetic. They avoid blaming the client, and they're collaborative with the client to try to help them bring about change where they want. The counselor is non-expert, and they're encouraging. The client is considered the protagonist of their own story, as well as the author, so that they can rewrite their story. The client must be directive in therapy and seek self-empowerment. The therapeutic relationship in narrative therapy is designed to empower the clients, to help them gain awareness of all the elements that are interacting on their life and how they can change these elements. Narrative therapy's view of human nature is that people make sense of themselves through the use of stories. Also views our reality as subjective. Other elements of their view of human nature, that we're all affected by outer societal events, and these help create our stories. Our stories are how we view our lives, and just we all act through the lens of how we think other people view us, our stories. Let's see. Doesn't believe that humans are really good or evil. Also, like SFT, it doesn't really believe in personality, thinks it's a man-made construction. Also thinks that people seek meaning from life. They want to know what their purpose is and what the purpose of events were. Narrative therapy's view of maladaptive behavior. It thinks that psychopathology was mostly a man-made idea, and that it really just depends on who defines psychopathology as to whether someone's mentally ill. Narrative therapy doesn't use binary language like healthy, unhealthy, normal, abnormal. Thinks that people's lives are complicated and multifaceted and cannot be broken down into right or wrong. Healthy behavior is, again, really not really right or wrong. It's just a complicated view of behavior. It depends on the person, what's healthy and what's unhealthy. Narrative therapy views that therapeutic change occurs really just in 5 steps. The first is defining the problem. The second is mapping the influence of the problem, where the counselor asks the client questions to sort of help clarify the problem, maybe change the way it's experienced, or externalize the problem, making the client feel more empowered. Then there's evaluating and justifying the effects of the problem, where clients assess how they're currently doing in relation to the problem and their role in the problem's persistence. Then there's identifying unique outcomes, which is where the counselor and client make note of any thoughts, feelings, or events that exist as exceptions to the problem story, and to identify how the client has been successful and can continue to be successful. And then finally there's reauthoring, where the client and the counselor either decide to keep the old story or write a new one, so like essentially a planning stage. And then the client names the story, and they produce as many details about the story as possible, and even outside people can be brought in to sort of support the new story. Goals of the theory are really just to help clients identify the forces that affect their lives, try to focus on the positive elements and enhance those and make changes to the negative elements. Another big goal is to thicken a client's story, which is essentially to raise awareness about all the elements in the story, kind of make sure that they don't just break things down into too simple of terms, too black and white of terms. Okay, the key concepts for narrative therapy. The story, that's a big key concept. It's considered a basic unit of experience that shows what people think about themselves and their lives, and it also serves as a filter for how we view ourselves. There's the idea of multiple stories, and those are all the different stories that make up the different elements of our lives, such as how we interact with people, how we're at work, etc. There's the dominant life story, and that's the primary story for an individual, which shows how they view themselves overall, such as a losing story, I'm a loser, or I'm a winner, a winning story. Then there's different components of a story, kind of just your general components, the setting, like where and when the story takes place, the characters, the people within the story, the plot, the events of the story, and all these pertain to the client's life, so it's the setting of their life, the people within their life, and what's happened in their life. There are alternative stories, and that's different versions of the same story about the same experience told by the same person. So just basically another way to look at how events transpired. There's preferred stories, and that's how a client wants their life to be. And then finally there's thin descriptions and thick descriptions. Thin descriptions are surface descriptions that sort of neglect the complexity involved in the client's life, such as labeling events or people as bad or good, And then thick descriptions, they're the opposite. They're more complex and give all the details about events or people. Okay, finally, the way of intervening, the techniques for narrative therapy. Biggest technique is probably externalizing the problem, and that is reframing the issue in a way that sort of puts it outside the client, like an oppositional force attacking the client's life. And this is done to empower the clients so that they might fight against the problem and make them feel less burdened by it. It also can make clients feel less guilty and less like the problem is them. Then there's developing unique outcomes, and that's identifying the thoughts, feelings, and events that contradict the main problem, which serves to identify potential solutions or alternate storylines to the client. Then there's deconstructing as a technique, and that's just a really intense analysis and breakdown of the problem, like its motives, what causes it, when it comes at the client. And looking at this helps reduce the client guilt and shame. There's reauthoring, and that is, let me see, where the client identifies basically how they'd like the story to unfold for the future, and then they can make changes to the original story, either by changing their perception of it or trying to make changes to the future. Helps the client outline goals and positive behaviors. There's also therapeutic letter writing. That's when the client writes letters to significant people in order to do work between sessions and kind of reinforce what they covered in sessions. And then there's using outsider witnesses, and that is introducing friends, family members, or supports to therapy to present and comment on the way that they identify with the client's issue, just to help the client recognize that they're not alone in their struggles. All right, and that's everything that I have in my notes for narrative therapy.